Hey guys, Shindig here. This is just a quick commentary style video discussing our guild's heroic SAURFANG kill on the ICC PTR. So, what you'll notice about this fight is that it's fairly straightforward. There isn't a whole lot going on depending on kind of what role you fill for this fight. And there are sort of different difficulty levels for this fight depending on how many paladins and specifically how many DIs you can send out to kind of make this fight a little bit easier. So what you'll notice here is that I'm just going to pause. There's a berserk timer in the top right of the corner here. It's 6 minutes on heroic, and this berserk timer you will never hit it ever. You could almost forget about it, right? What wipes you to this fight will be marks and mark damage. We'll discuss that in a little bit here, but you see the boss's energy bar. When this reaches 100, he puts a mark on a player and they start taking damage for the rest of the fight. But other things you're going to notice, I hit play again. People get blood boil, different dots that go on people. Now, you can use Blessing and Protection to get rid of this debuff. We see it gets used on Sweaters here, one of our Feral Druids. This is a good press, especially early on in the fight when you're trying to delay the boss getting energy, especially if you're doing something like what we do, where we want to lust on pull, while we still have all of our players able to actually attack the boss and be active. As I mentioned, you can use DI to kind of get rid of some of the marks, but when you DI somebody, they're out for the rest of the fight. So, lusting on pull is pretty good here. So we get our first set of ads here. Now, how we dealt with our ads is we had melee nuke one down inside of a Hodge, and then the ranged nuke to the rest of the ads down. Using frost traps for slows, knockbacks, we saw one of our boomkins just knock back an ad. That same boomkin then just died to an ad, unfortunately. We actually had two boomkins in this setup, so we had double knocks, which made this pretty free. But if you find that your range are great, then melee don't need to swap to an ad. With good CC and kind of rotations, you can sort of cover that pretty well. If you feel like your range need help, then you can assign melee to kill one of the ads, or multiple, inside of a stun. The important thing, though, is that you don't want to assign melee to too many ads, because if they pull threat and get autoed, that sort of defeats the purpose. Right? Each time a blood beast autos somebody in the raid, the boss gains blood power. As we see now, somebody has a mark, one of our rogues, and the boss is about to put out a second mark. And this second mark actually goes on me, as we see here. So, going back to the quick discussion here, I'm just going to pause the video, about mark utility. Holy Paladins are very, very strong for this fight, because their healing profile basically enables them to cover marks essentially on their own. There are some exceptions for classes that are very squishy, and with TOGC gear and kind of smaller stamina pools, even if a Holy Paladin is just slamming them, there can be some difficulties keeping them up. In particular, Affliction Warlocks, Mages, and non-Shadow Priests generally have a very difficult time surviving to marks the higher the boss energy has. Because the mark damage that goes out, it's effectively splash damage from the boss's auto hit, and the boss hits a lot harder when he's closer to 100 energy, which can lead to a lot of these kind of cloth-wearing players, because this mark damage is physical, getting two-shotted within like a second or something. And it's borderline unhealable. So there are ways to combat this, and I'll kind of get into that, but in our kill, we actually do like a lot of things wrong, I would say. And I'll kind of point those out as we go. Things we can do better, and such that if you kind of end up in these situations where you have rather unlucky people being targeted by marks, you at least have a decent, like a plan to combat that. So, let's resuming the fight here. Another thing that makes the marks particularly deadly is if a mark person gets also targeted with the blood boil debuff. So you see the different people getting targeted by blood boil. If this was to overlap with one of the mark targets, for example, this is overlap with Calc right now, that's a great defensive press for him if he's used something like Feint, right? Feint reduces the damage you take, which makes the rogues particularly good on this mechanic, because they're very tanky. Our tank actually goes down here, so we get the boss does a lot of self-healing with this Rune of Blood. I actually didn't talk about the tank mechanic here. You effectively just taunt off each other every 20 seconds. If the tank attacks you with this Rune of Blood active, the boss heals for a significant amount. This healing is reduced by MS effects, so like Wound Poison, Mortal Strike, or Aim Shot. So definitely good value having that up. Even if you have perfect taunt swaps, the boss is going to inevitably heal because there can be an application of like the Rune of Blood followed by a melee hit like 0.2 seconds later or something. And that's just not, it's not reasonable for your to expect your tanks to taunt off, like that's kind of faster than human reaction speed. So the boss will inevitably do some amount of healing, even with perfect taunt swaps. So again, running an MS effect is generally recommended, especially for prog when you're not going to be super precise with these taunt swaps. And, or in our case, you might have tank deaths, and then, that's a lot of tank healing that would go through otherwise. So I think we had a hunter keeping up aim shot, so that was sort of our MS effect. Thing goes down here. Third mark goes out, and this is where I think we kind of make the first mistake here. So I call for a DI on myself. Yeah, so we see a Rep Paladin dies, I get DI'd, and now I'm out of the fight. So the reason I think this is an issue is because this just isn't necessary. The way we had planned this fight out, so we had 2 DIs we can effectively use. We have 4 Paladins in the raid. Your 2 Holy Paladins, you generally don't want to ask them to DI because they're very, very good at healing mark targets. So in this case, what we were doing is we had 1 Holy Paladin. They would beacon the first mark, and then they would like prio heal the third mark when it went out. We had our other Holy Paladin beacon the second mark, and then just heal tanks. So that's kind of how the way we were doing it. So when we got the third mark out, it was on a healer. I ended up calling to DI myself, but what would have been a better press is it would have been a better use of DI had we waited for the 4th mark to go out. Because what you want to do is choose classes that can't survive very well. In this case, all the classes that have mark, we don't want to DI. Rogues are very good at living with feint, and then you can't DI your Holy Paladin because you need them heal. So I call for DI on the rogue here. I think this is the bad call. I should have waited, right? See if the mark 4 that goes out would be on a better person. And these first 3 marks were kind of chilling, right? We have our Holy Paladins covering all 3 of them. They're your strongest healers for these people, right? It's a good lineup. One thing that's important as well is that you want, if anyone dies in this encounter for any reason, it is imperative that they get rebuffed with stamina buffs in particular when they come back up. Because we've had situations where we have somebody die to ads, right? They get autoed or something, they pull a threat. They get picked back up. They then get marked later in the fight, and again, they die within 1 or 2 ticks that you can't expect to heal because their stamina or they don't have the stamina to live more than 2 hits. So stamina rebuffs for kings, mark even, very, very, very high value in this fight. So 4th mark goes out here, and it's on a warrior. So again, this is actually great lineup for us. These are all extremely tanky classes, okay? And this is generally a good point. Like, this is the mark I think you would effectively want to DI. You don't have to DI mark 4. It could be one of the earlier marks if that's the person that's kind of more squishy. But generally, your Holy Paladins are comfortable up until the 4th mark, which is when your other healers will need to, like, consciously... They're directly responsible for keeping this person alive. I mean, it depends on the way you do healing assignments, right? But in our case, that's how it was. So pressing DI now is a little bit better value, and this is why I think we made the incorrect decision, DI me as early as we did, because we effectively lost my damage for 30 seconds or so of the fight. So we have our Ret Paladin and our Prot Paladin planning to press DI. Our Ret's already used it, so we need a Prot to then press it next. Right now, our Prot Pally is tanking. So the idea is that you want to wait for a lineup where your Prot Paladin tank has just had the boss taunted off them, and there's no Blood Beast set coming up in case they have like a Hodge assignment or something. If you have those 2 lineups, or maybe your Prot Paladin isn't responsible for pressing Hodge or anything, then just wait until the other tank taunts off so they can send their DI. Because the Prot Pally, once they send their DI out and they die, ideally you take a Soul Stone, you have your Relux Soul Stone, these Paladins that are going to die during the encounter. They'll need a second to get spot buffs on themselves, and the other players will need a bit of time to rebuff them because, our Paladin, maybe that's assigned to doing kings, is maybe it's your Holy Paladin that is also trying to keep 2 mark targets alive. Your priest that's now having to heal 1 mark target and the tanks, or so fort isn't super easy press, so they have to line up at a time where somebody's not going to die. So these are all kind of things to think about, but the more time you give for your tank to get those buffs back, aka right after they get the boss taunted off them, is good. So I believe we send our next DI soon, but because I got DI'd early, what we were doing, kind of the rule was, if your mark gets DI'd, your new assignment becomes the most recent mark, right? That was the idea and kind of the principle we rolled with for dealing with DIs. But this is something we didn't execute that correctly in this fight. What ended up happening was when Mark 2 got DI'd, in this case me, right? Our Holy Paladin that was responsible for healing Mark 2 moved their beacon to Mark 3, but Mark 3 was already covered. So for the rest of the fight, we ended up killing the boss here, but for the rest of the fight, we had both of our Holy Paladins putting effective healing into Beacon 3, or into Mark 3, right? So we had an extra mark that just wasn't covered, and we still managed to kill the boss, which goes to show how powerful DI tech is. And if you run out of DIs, or you don't have that luxury, then your other healers have to step in and kind of fill that role. Again, what we ended up doing is we had Holy Paladins covering the first 3, we planned to have DIs on the next 2 marks, and then from that point onwards, we had our Resto Druid and kind of our Priest looking out for further marks. And with our Resto Shaman just chain healing off the tank, covering kind of all marks within melee. So I think we'll see here. Our Prop Paladin should send out DI fairly shortly. And the end of this fight is pretty dangerous too, right? Because the boss gets 30% increased attack speed, which is difficult to kind of navigate. Yeah, so you see the DI goes out there and it goes on Mark 4. So what would be correct here, we see the boss just reach 100 energy. He's about to send a new mark out. We have 1 and 3 that are still taking damage. Our Mark 2 Paladin had 2 DI'd, so their new mark would have been a Mark 4, okay? As I mentioned before, they put their beacon on Mark 3 and we're healing that, which is incorrect in our situation. But had they done that correctly, it would have been Mark 2. Mark 2 gets DI'd, it then jumps to Mark 4. Mark 4 gets DI'd by a Prop Paladin. Their new mark is now Mark 5. That didn't happen. It ended up falling to our Resto Druid and our Disc Priest, and kind of our Resto Shaman for any melee marks that went out to cover these people. But it just goes to show kind of the amount of leeway that we'd have. Anyways, boss gets 30% increased attack speed towards the end of the fight here. If you're not using the DI strat, this is generally where you press Lust, because this is where most of the damage is going out. And it's a very high value for healers in particular, where you need that throughput. You see Mark 6 go out. A really, really good lineup of marks so far. They've all been on melee. Chain heal's going absolutely crazy right now. And one of our Holy Paladins isn't even healing the correct target. So we actually see one of our tanks die here, which is a little scary. Boss is getting healed because he's hitting Dose. We have one more B-res. I think we put it on Flash. Dose then goes down. It's on Flashback again. Another mark's out. We have no coverage because our Prop Paladin's on the wrong person. Odoa ends up getting bopped. You see this here? Crazy fucking bop. Whoever set this out. Dose is dead. It's on Flash. We have our Warrior shield wall taunt for the boss for like 2 seconds, and then we end up killing it. So, kind of a chaotic end. Managed to get it done. But that's SAURFANG. Hopefully there was something in there that was helpful, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.